All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining our discussion on workplace of the future, adapting to a post-pandemic new normal. We are pleased to welcome Julie Davidson back to campus to lead our discussion today. The pandemic has certainly changed how organizations operate, and Julie is here to share her experiences working in a corporate environment during the pandemic and how business culture could be impacted by these alternate work arrangements. Julie started her journey to becoming the Market CFO of Iowa, Central Southern Illinois, Kansas, Missouri, and Nebraska for UnitedHealthcare right here at Westminster College, graduating with a degree in accounting. Julie started her career in public accounting before moving to UnitedHealthcare, where she became the CFO in 2008. In 2016, Julie was named CFO of the Year by the St. Louis Business Journal, which is awarded annually to CFOs who help their organizations grow beyond the bottom line. Our mission and vision at Westminster College includes a campus and a community being lifelong learners and leaders of character committed to the values and integrity, fairness, respect, and responsibility. As alumnus, Julie has certainly met that vision and mission. A distinguished and successful career has not stopped Julie from giving back to her community. Julie is currently a board treasurer at the YWCA of Metropolitan St. Louis and a board member of the Midwest Health Initiative, which is a regional health care improvement organization. So it's great pleasure that we welcome Julie Davidson back to campus.
Thanks for that introduction. I don't have to give a lot of my background. So thank you all for being here today in person and virtually as well. This sort of hybrid participation is exactly the topic of what we're going to talk about here today, and how that is what we're seeing in the workplace these days and what the future might be with respect to how work is completed in the future. I believe most of you or a lot of you are in the accounting classes, is that correct? Yes? Yep, okay, all right, great. Well, thank you. My background is in accounting, as Noel shared with you. I worked in public accounting for many years and then moved to UnitedHealthcare. I have been there for 26 years. So part of my offering to share with you today is my experience at UnitedHealthcare in dealing with the pandemic and how our organization responded as an example that you might want to hear about. I graduated with an accounting degree. Don Lofi, who is here, actually hired me in public accounting, and that's where my career started. So thank you, Don, for having me here today. You know, an event like this is just so fabulous that you guys have this opportunity here. When I was at Westminster, we did not have this similar kind of symposium. And so I'm so glad to see that all of you are taking advantage of this and participating and learning what you can from it. So thank you all for being here. So let's start with what the agenda is, what at least my planned remarks are. I do appreciate if anyone has any questions or would like to interject at any time, please feel free to do so. I would like this to be as interactive as possible, and as opposed to me just talking at you for the next hour or so. So I believe we'll have someone monitoring the online chat as well, so it's possible that we might have some questions come in that way as well, so please feel free. So for today, as I mentioned, I'll share with you the experience that I had as working for UnitedHealthcare in a pandemic response. We'll talk a little bit about, in general, what we've learned about remote work, and then what employees are looking for, as well as what some of the pros and cons are of hybrid work. And then what will the future hold? I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't have all the answers, but I can share with you, what I see and what others have shared and what they think as well. And then lastly, I think it would be helpful for you to have some advice or tips on how you can be successful in a hybrid work environment. So, show of hands, how many of you are familiar with the cartoon The Jetsons? Okay, maybe about half. Someone in our office shared this when the pandemic first hit. It's sort of a joke because as you see all these various activities here happening in a virtual type of a way, back in the early 60s, when the Jetsons came out, and I learned this, I did not know this, I did a little research online. It was only on for 2 seasons, but it's been syndicated and shown and reshown for so many years that a lot of folks are familiar with it. But these types of activities where maybe back in the early 60s were thought of as sort of the future, very futuristic, are very commonplace today. And in fact, I think what happened when last year, when the pandemic first hit, I think it just helped to accelerate all of these types of virtual activities. So I can attest, I have done many online yoga classes, and hopefully you guys have had the opportunity to participate in those kinds of things as well. Any of these things ring true for any of you? Telemedicine, has anyone ever used telemedicine? Yep, some people have, yeah. That was really something that in the healthcare field we were promoting, but had not really taken off until the pandemic sort of accelerated that as well. So as many organizations had to respond and determine how they were going to operate, how their business was going to operate in a pandemic type of world, UnitedHealthcare had the same kinds of considerations. Various industries were impacted in different ways. Larger organizations had more resources in order to be able to continue operations potentially. Smaller organizations, maybe not so much. I know in our business, where we provide health insurance coverage to employers, there were quite a few small employers that basically just closed their doors because they were not able to continue offering to operate, basically. It was not financially viable for them. So in our organization, we really looked at it from a couple of different perspectives. We have customers and members that we needed to continue to service. We also had some perspectives of how we can help in the community, consistent with our culture as an organization, and also how we would address the needs of our employees. So we'll start with our customers and how we helped our customers, how we responded, and then also how we responded to the local community as well. So I think one of the things that was really important through all of this, and I think you can attest to this too, just as in general, is communication. And so how many of you remember, when the pandemic first was in the early stages, there'd be something on the news every day, every hour. You could be watching this all day long and you'd be hearing all kinds of new information and trying to figure out what is accurate, what is not, and just keep up with what the latest developments were, because it seemed like there was always something new being shared about COVID-19 and what the government's response was and what employers and others, how they needed to respond. But communication was really important. So I think one of the things that our organization really focused on was communication externally and internally. And so we held virtual communication events for customers and for our broker partners who are part of our distribution system and selling business to employers. So that was very important for us, is to keep those lines of communication open, even beyond just the normal connections that folks might have into our business, like through customer service or through account executives, et cetera. But then we looked also at our customers and how can we help our customers. So there's a couple of different ways that we approached that. One was for those organizations that perhaps because of the pandemic, they were not able to operate as they normally would, and revenues were down. We were able to work with those organizations to set up payment plans so that they could extend the timeline for which they would need to pay for the healthcare services, healthcare coverage for their employees. We also implemented some special enrollment periods for people who didn't have healthcare coverage, because for those folks that didn't have coverage and had the fear of getting COVID, not sure how they would be able to afford the services that they might need should they get COVID, we allowed for special enrollment for those individuals as well. And we also waived member cost sharing if they're related to testing and treatment related to COVID type diagnoses. And then I talked a little bit about telehealth services. Also, we expanded our coverage of telehealth services. So that meant that more services were considered to be eligible for telehealth type of arrangement. And then from a community standpoint, a couple of things were a focus for our organization. One, we provide, some parts of our organization actually provide healthcare services to individuals. So we don't have a lot of that, but we do in some instances. So where we had doctors and nurses, and even doctors and nurses that worked within our organization that were not delivering care, we sort of mobilized and had a way for those folks to offer to donate their time and volunteer to help in situations where there was greater need for folks with healthcare expertise. So we organized those folks to do that. One of our cafeterias in one of our larger facilities in the Twin Cities, we actually provided food for local families because we didn't have employees in the building. 25% of, we had to have less than 25% population in our buildings, and so folks weren't there. So we took those folks, redeployed them, and had them make meals and provide those to folks in the local community. And then all of our employees in lots of different locations just took it upon themselves to do what they could using their talents to help others by making masks. I know one of our employees in Nebraska put out the word and said, if you have any leftover material or old T-shirts or that are still within usable shape, send them to her, and she would make masks out of them. And so I know a bunch of us had done that. Others were helping their neighbors, especially the elderly who were not trying to avoid going out by delivering food and taking other supplies to them. This was especially important in our Medicare population because a lot of those folks were not getting out in the community. And then from an employee perspective,
Try this one.
Technology, you love it when you know. We have it working here. There we go. So are you going to have the control for me?
Try to press the button again.
There we go. Perfect. All right. From an employee perspective, so as I mentioned, we had requirement to limit our capacity to 25%. So that meant that we had to shift a lot of folks to a virtual environment very quickly. We've got over 200,000 employees in our organization. About half of those were available to be able to be moved to a virtual environment. So we did that within about a week. Now, an organization of our size, fortunately, had the resources to be able to do that, but some organizations that are smaller may not have had those capabilities. But it was a pretty impressive effort to get get all that taken care of in a short period of time. We also began using Microsoft Teams. That was our internal tool for virtual meetings, and we accelerated that rollout of that technology so that we could have more folks that are working virtually be able to still collaborate and have those kinds of interactions. The one thing I talked about communication, the one thing I thought that was really different for our organization was that our CEO actually had a daily video meeting with all employees, just for half an hour, 45 minutes, whatever was necessary at that point in time. But he would get online, and he would talk and have other folks from our leadership team and from our organization meet and talk with all the employees. We had an opportunity to ask questions just to make sure that we were getting out and communicating to all the employees the latest information about what was going on, what our response was, what we're doing, what we're not doing, just as an opportunity to make sure that everyone was feeling like they were connected and were part of what was going on in the organization. From an employee perspective, from a medical cost and providing cost coverage to employees, we did a couple of things similar to what we did for our members. We offered special enrollment for those that didn't have coverage to enroll so that they could get medical cost coverage. No cost sharing on any COVID-related diagnoses, early prescription refills, etc., if you weren't able to make it out to the pharmacy. But then also, even beyond just the medical cost coverage for employees, we looked at other different kinds of employee services or employee needs. So for example, from a financial perspective, if folks had young children at home and needed to make other arrangements with regard to childcare, we offered benefits to folks to cover some of that additional cost. Also, we have a working parents social media group so that working parents could connect and talk about what was going on, what they were experiencing, helping each other out, sharing ideas, how to balance the working at home versus having children at home too, and how to take care of that. And then a couple of other things. One, recognizing that some employees might have some financial concerns. Maybe one spouse was furloughed and loss of income for a period of time. So offered additional resources to take loans from their 401k or offer distributions as well. And then also just from a well-being perspective, provided additional resources to help with any mental health issues, dealing with stress. Everybody who wasn't stressed out during that time. I hope nobody was. I think all of us had some level of additional stress during this point in time. So I have to say that our organization, as I was looking back at all the various things that were part of the response to our customers, to the community, to our employees, was really, I'm very proud of our organization because I feel like we did a lot to make sure that folks were being taken care of and had opportunities for additional resources to help them out throughout this time. And a lot of these same resources, even 18 months later, are still available to our employees and to our customers. So what did we learn about remote work? Some folks pre-pandemic may have had some preconceived notions about how productive employees might be working in a remote environment. But I think what we've seen is that people are at least as productive in a remote environment for the most part. There are always going to be some folks that really, really thrive in that type of environment, others maybe that don't, and then a whole host of folks sort of in between. But generally, overall, that we found that there is as much productivity in a remote environment than there was pre-pandemic. Some folks had some concerns about safety on public transportation. Now, this is probably most applicable in larger urban areas where there is public transportation. I would say probably in this environment, say it's in Fulton, Missouri, it's a little bit different. But in the larger geographic areas, I think that was definitely a concern of folks. So, being in small confined spaces with a lot of people, what is the safety concern there? A couple of other surveys provided that information that employees would really prefer to have some sort of a mix of at home versus in the office type of work. So I think that's really what's leading us to a hybrid workplace, which is what most of the environment has been to date, and probably will be going forward as well. A couple of interesting statistics that I came across. One was about how often do workers want to work from home, and I think what this is telling us is that there's basically three buckets, and it's pretty equally distributed. About a third of employees would probably like to work from home 100% of the time. Another third always want to be in the office, and then there's that in between as well. But I think the other piece that's really kind of interesting here is that there's a difference between, especially in family situations, mothers versus fathers. So somewhat of a gender disparity here. About 50% more of women would rather be working from home full time, and that probably has a lot to do with being the primary caregiver when it comes to the children in the home. But these are some learnings from a couple of surveys here that were conducted as a result of the pandemics and work arrangements over the last year or so. So what are some of our pros and cons related to hybrid work? First of all, one pro is that it encourages a more or a stronger work-life balance. I think some folks were saying that, one scenario was that some folks working from home might be early risers and want to get up early and get going and start their day early, maybe take a break midday and then pick it up later on in the afternoon. Others, are strictly their 8 to 5 kind of schedule. But this could provide a little bit of flexibility and as to when folks might get their work done and also get some other things done from a personal perspective as well. It can also provide a more economical environment, a more economical workplace. So I know in our organization, we spent quite a bit of money in about 3 or 4 years ago, refacing and reconfiguring our whole office building. We've got probably 2,000 employees in our office in St. Louis. Since the pandemic, we've probably had 200 people in the building. And on a go-forward basis, probably not going to have those 2,000 back. But there's going to be something sort of in between. And so now we need to figure out, what are we going to do with this building that we have that is fairly new and we've invested a lot of money in. And I'm sure a lot of other organizations are thinking the same way. But what kind of physical workspace do we need on a go-forward basis? So these are all questions that many organizations are asking themselves. Also, it's possible that there could be a larger talent pool. If folks are going to be working remotely or a hybrid of some sort, it might open up opportunities for folks that might not otherwise have had those opportunities. We'll see how that works out. It could also help to provide the possibility for other crises that could be in the future and have the workforce be a little bit more resilient. So if you've got a hybrid workforce and for some reason need to pivot again, you might have some more flexibility for that. It might not be as disruptive as it has been in this particular situation. And then lastly, it could help to reduce any spread of any other kinds of viruses. We're still talking about variants. We've got Delta variant and mu variants going on right now. I think we all thought this pandemic, we would be past this point at this point, and we just are not yet. So it could help in mitigating the effects of those additional variants in the future. Some cons of hybrid work. We were talking a little bit about this earlier. Not all work environments are the same. Not everybody has the same possibility in their home environment. Some folks, I know, some of my colleagues, it would be interesting to see where in some of our teams meetings they would be sitting in their house. Some people were at the kitchen table. Some people were in the basement because you could see sort of the rafters, above them. Others, my particular perspective, it really wasn't much of an impact for me because I already have an office in my home, and I was sort of working in a hybrid sort of scenario pre-pandemic. So for me, it was really not much of a change. But those with children that have small kids, children that are school age, that now they're at home and they want your attention as much as while you're trying to get your work done and their distractions. I think that's definitely been an issue. So not everybody has access to reliable internet service as well. I think in the urban areas, that's probably not as much of an issue, but it could be more in some of the rural areas. Frontline workers, hybrid work isn't even an option. I think we came to realize what were the types of jobs that folks needed to be there in person, obviously. Healthcare workers, retail, grocery store folks, public works. I mean, if we didn't have folks who were sort of, maintaining our public work facilities, we wouldn't have electricity and water and all those other things. So that's not necessarily going to be an option for those kinds of employees. So those would all need to be factors in those organizations to think about. Also, hybrid work could lead to some individuals getting better opportunities than others. If you're not physically in an office environment where you have physical interaction with other people in person, face to face, and others are only participating in a virtual type of way, there could be some type of a gap that could come to be between those two different types of scenarios. You think about like a meeting in an office setting or a conference room, kind of like here. So we've got folks who are on Zoom, and we have people who are here physically. And so I can see some of the folks on Zoom who have their pictures up, some people who have their video on, but not everybody does. Are those folks still interacting in the same kind of way as the folks here? And because I can see your eyes, I can't even see your face, but I can see your eyes and see, we've got some other connection happening here than those folks that are online. So that'll be something that employers will need to really be cognizant of and think about in the future. And just general challenges dealing with collaboration. How do you have folks collaborate in an environment where you've got folks that are physically present but also not physically present but virtually present? So what's the future going to hold? As I said before, I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know exactly, but it's going to vary, and there's going to be some type of hybrid for most organizations. I've heard talk of our organization prior to the Delta surge. had talked about having specified days where people would be in the office. And that would be set by your immediate supervisor. So your group would have to be in the office on certain days of the week. That might be where some organizations move to in the future. We've since put that on hold, and not really probably looking at having people come back into the office until probably February of next year. Now that's all subject to change, depending on what happens with you and various other developments, but we'll see how that works out. Teams that work together, I think part of those considerations of when folks will be in the office will be what teams work together and how do we make sure that those folks are together in person on the same days or have some overlap so that they can collaborate. Work from home schedules, again, as we talked about, there could be some diversity. I mean, the gap between those who are physically present in the office more and more versus those who are not could generate some a gap there from a diversity perspective, but that's something that we'll need to make sure we're focusing on from an employer perspective. And then physical workspace, we talked about that. That could change. Offices might be reduced. Workspace might be reconfigured so that folks are more socially distant from each other, more spacing. Kind of ironic, on part of our building refresh, we put people closer together. And then, of course, when the pandemic hit, then we were like, okay, we can't have this arrangement. So we went to staggered kind of seating, so really could only accommodate up to half of what we actually had planned for initially. So at this point, that hasn't been a problem because we're still at 25% or less capacity, but something we'll have to think about as an organization. So how can you be successful in a hybrid work environment? I found a couple of suggestions from some folks, and I included them here. I would say though that these suggestions really would apply regardless of a hybrid work environment. I think these tips are things that you should be thinking about anyway as a potential employee. So first off, curiosity. And this was interesting that it was phrased this way: behave like a self-motivated student. And you are all students, so this is perfect for that. So ask why. Always, as a young child, if any of you, most of you probably, some of you have children, and who may ask why. Young kids always ask why. They're curious. They want to know. So that's the first suggestion. In fact, I was telling some others earlier today about UnitedHealthcare and our Coulter values. Part of our culture journey at UnitedHealthcare includes learning about and really focusing on different ways of working together better. And curiosity is part of that. We have what we call the mood elevator. And curiosity is sort of right in the middle, and that's what we all strive for. So we always talk about being curious and asking questions and working together and trying not to think about coming into it with your own ideas ahead of time, but be more curious and ask questions. Be proactive and invest in yourself. I think, regardless of any situation, I think that is very important for everybody. Secondly, empathy. So we talk a lot at our organization too about empathy, walking in the shoes of the other person. We all have biases, whether we realize it or not, and it's important to sort of take a step back and think about what the other person, what their situation is like, and what they may be hearing from how you are delivering a message, or what your body language might be saying. Another one of our tools is to assume positive intent. Most people want to do the right thing. And so you need to remember that and think about that as we're listening to and hearing what other people are saying or how they are acting. And then lastly, being open to experience. So getting out of your comfort zone. That is something that we all need to keep in mind. So here's some actual suggestions. Chat with people that aren't part of your immediate team or work group. Volunteer for new tasks. And set a commitment each week to do something that is different from what you've done the previous. Maybe every week is a little bit much, but maybe once a month. Adapt it to yourself. So those are some keys to what I think will help you to be successful in a hybrid work environment. And then lastly, I'll share just a couple of sources that you might take a look at if you have interest in looking at something further. I think, Noel, you'll have the presentation so you can share that with others. So you will have this information if you're interested in looking at any of these additional resources. You know, and I would just suggest you go online and you can search on hybrid work, and there's all kinds of stuff that comes up. So that's how I found a lot of these materials. All right. So with that, I'll pause. See if folks have any questions or thoughts or any experiences that you'd like to share that might be helpful for others.
So in looking at UnitedHealthcare, do you feel like you saw more productivity on an online basis or more of a in-person basis?
I think it probably depends on the work, the nature of the work. So I would say in the customer service environment, it was pretty much the same. Folks were either they were sitting in their on the phone in the office, or they were sitting on the phone at home. We have a way to monitor and track that. For some of the less the more face-to-face kind of roles, like salespeople, account management, who would deal with customers and brokers, I know that they really felt like they were missing out on what they normally would be doing. It felt very uncomfortable for them, and not having some of that face-to-face interaction perhaps hurt some of the relationships, or maybe not hurt the relationships with some of the external customers or brokers, but it just didn't quite have the same feel to it. Because it's very different when you're having a conversation, as you see someone in a little box on a screen, as opposed to face-to-face and, going to lunch or having coffee or having, sometimes the whole, one of the things that we've really tried to do in some of our internal meetings is spend that time sort of at the beginning of a Teams meeting with some of that small talk kind of stuff. So what are you doing for the weekend? What's going on? Who's got vacation plans? Those kinds of things, just to sort of keep the interpersonal and, the person kind of interactions still happening. Do you have any questions?
Yes.
In the chat? Okay.
Somebody says, you said that hybrid will likely be the norm in the future. My father's company has tried to push everyone back into full-time in office by October, but this has resulted in a large amount of resignations. Do you think that this is backwards thinking, or is it warranted?
I'd be curious as to what type of work it is that is happening in that work environment. I know some organizations, folks that I interact with, who they have not changed anything since day one. They've been in the office every day, and this was in a commercial trust environment, so they deal with managing money for folks. So it's an investment type of firm. Very high touch, very interactive with their customers, and they have just said, you know what, we have to be in the workplace. And so that has worked for them. Now, it may not for other organizations. I think, I've heard on various podcasts, and I listen to NPR a lot, so I hear a lot of stories about work environment. And one of the recent podcasts I heard talked about how organizations really, or how employees are really sort of dictating more about what the work environment is going to be. I think it's going to vary from organization to organization, and I think it becomes important for employers to really listen to their employees, and vice versa, and really work through some of those issues. Perhaps a compromise would be something that could work for both the employer and employees. It's a brokerage. Okay. I saw insurance company. I think it was Essence, maybe.
Yes.
He
said that.
Yeah, Essence is right around the road, right around the corner from our office. Yeah. I don't know. It just depends on the organization, and it might be a smaller organization too. Essence is not.
I think that he said he has worked for Essence in the past.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that it is a very similar environment where he works now.
Yeah. Other thoughts, other questions or experiences? Yeah.
The one study you shared said that the study, it showed that the productivity levels of people working from home were the same. I thought that was really interesting because, at least from a student's perspective, I don't like the way all of our peers have talked. I feel like our productivity level, whenever we were sent home for COVID, wasn't necessarily the same. So I'm just curious, do you think that in the workplace was the quality of work not as well? Maybe they were just as productive, but the quality of work went down? Because I feel like that's kind of the case as a student. That's how I feel. It was harder to put as much effort in. I was maybe getting things done, but it wasn't the same quality of work.
Right. Maybe it's a little bit different way of the work you were getting done, right? You weren't quite interacting with other folks, and that's, I think that's really true. And it's going to vary from person to person, and from role to role, how that's going to impact the outcomes. It's going to be different in every situation, but generally, I think some of these are generalizations. But I think the key is going to be in finding that right balance between being, in a virtual type of setting versus an in-person kind of setting, and kind of figuring out what that balance is. And that's going to take some work on the part of both employees and employers to find, that right formula for that particular organization. I've also, I heard a recent podcast too about a 4-day work week, and that doesn't mean a 40-hour work week condensed into 4 days. It's a 32-hour work week, and it was really interesting in that organizations that have made that shift really had to put the work in to figure out how to make that happen and continue to be as productive. And for organizations that have made this successful, they've actually seen growth. So by shortening their work days, or the number of days of work per week, they've actually spent the time figuring out what was stuff that they were doing that really wasn't of any value, cutting that out and spending the time and focusing on what was the most value, and doing it in 4 days, and that's it. And the employees had 3 days to them, to do personal stuff, and they love it. And some of the feedback from those employees that are working at those organizations were that they would not go to another employer that did not do the same thing. So, that's something very real that's out there. So another thing to sort of keep in mind. Good questions. Appreciate that. Yes.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, these are awesome questions, guys. Do you see a difference in training for interns and then, maybe the students who just graduate? Do you see a different set of training now with the hybrid model?
So I know for our organization, we do some of both. We've got on-the-job training, but then we also have some things that are done online. Just because our organization is very large, it's not really not efficient to have training people in every location. So it helps to have things sort of in a virtual type environment. But I think, again, it's going to come down to sort of that balance between what is the best formula there. But I think for newer employees, at least at this point, our tendency is to want to have them be physically in the office more so. I think it just is better at this point, for someone who is new to have some interaction, have a mentor, someone who they're paired with to sort of help them and guide them and help them in their journey as a new employee. Good question. All good questions. All right.
Is that it? Well, again, I want to thank you, Julie, for coming back. Very good, overall. Really good information. The world is changing. The world is
It
changing.
absolutely is. Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.